In February 1989, a man with the name Alec Newald was abducted by aliens and taken for 10 days to their home world, where they told him the truth about them, showed him amazing technology, and sent him back with a message for all humanity. During those 10 mind-opening days, Alec learned a lot about the alien race that hosted him. But incredibly, he learned much more shocking things about the human race, and what he learned changed his whole perspective about life on this planet. So much so that when he returned to Earth, he discovered that government agencies were determined to do all they could to stop him from sharing the truth. But today, in this new episode of Secret Origins, I will share with you the whole story of Alec Newald's abduction and the truth he reveals about aliens and humanity. Welcome. In early February 1989, Alec Newald got into his car in his native hometown Rotorua and drove to the city of Auckland, New Zealand. And under normal circumstances, it wouldn't take more than 3 hours. Still, when he arrived in Auckland, Alec recalls feeling extremely tired, with his heart racing and his mouth dry. To make matters worse, he felt disoriented and got lost on the streets of the city where he had lived most of his life. His wristwatch, he soon found out, had stopped working. Strangely, the clock in his car had stopped working at the exact same time, 10:30 a.m. He decided to go straight to bed. Everything would be normal the next day. Except it wasn't. The first thing he learned the next day was that it was a Thursday. How strange, he thought. Alec had left Rotorua on a Monday, so the following day should have been a Tuesday. But not only that, it was Thursday the next week. He had arrived in Auckland City 10 days after departing Rotorua. What had happened in that time? He could not remember. In the following days, Alec experienced more disorientation, as well as recurring and disturbing dreams and painful headaches. His car failed often, so instead of spending a fortune fixing it, he sold it for a low price. When he went to retrieve all his belongings from the car, he found 2 small crystals of pyrite, a known mineral known popularly as fool's gold. He also took a sketchbook that he always carried around, but when he opened it, he found out it was full of strange sketches and doodles he did not remember drawing. Still, with all the strange things that were going on these days, he didn't give it a lot of thought and tossed the drawings on his home desk. A few days later, 2 people knocked on his door. They identified themselves as scientists and members of the DSIR, the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. According to Alec, a New Zealander did most of the talking. The other gentleman had a British accent, and when he showed him his DSIR card, Alec also saw another card reading Royal Institute for International Affairs. They left, but promised to come back at a later date. Feeling a little paranoid, but still thinking this had to do entirely with the car, Alec moved to another place and didn't share the address with anybody. But despite these measures, he found himself answering the door to the same 2 men a few weeks later. This time, they were much more insistent and had several specific questions to which Alec did not have answers. Claiming that he had no more answers to give them, he asked the men to leave and never come back. The next evening, when Alec returned to his apartment, he felt a strange sensation. Someone had broken into the apartment. Everything was in place, except for the 2 pyrite crystals, which were missing, and several pages from his sketchbook. Oh well, he thought, they got what they were looking for. Now at least they will leave me alone. At that time, he couldn't know just how wrong he was about that. Because from that moment on, he began to remember. At first, he thought these were just normal dreams, only more persistent. But the longer he dreamt, the more they made sense. They were parts of a story he had lived. He started going to sleep with a notebook and a pen on top of his nightstand. Soon enough, the memories started flowing, along with pictures and sounds that he was beginning to remember. He was astonished and scared of all the facts that had been stored in his brain, but only now started to come out. He even wrote a book about his experience titled Co-Evolution, an Interplanetary Adventure. Just watch until the end of this video to learn what this man experienced during those 10 days when he was abducted, and what he learned there about the aliens and the history of the human race. As he remembered, he was driving slower than usual that morning due to the presence of heavy fog. Suddenly, he began to feel something strange, like everything was in slow motion. His vision became blurred. The steering wheel began vibrating, and then everything around him started to shake. The steering wheel locked, and he lost control of the car. The next thing Alec remembers is being suspended midair. Around him, although he could not see his body and was not sure if he had one, Alec could sense a ring of blue light. This is how he described this state. Eventually, and most likely because I was becoming acclimatized to the low light level and whatever other transformation my body may have been going through, it was possible for me to make some ghost-like entities moving about in the far distance. There seemed to be a faint golden glow about them. I looked down to see if there was any similarity between them and me, but it was difficult to be sure. He also recalls feeling an air of complete tranquility. He felt no fear, no anxiety. Now he was in a large, flat area, surrounded by a ring of light that covered everything. His sight got used to the brightness of that place, and as he turned around, he met face to face with two humanoid creatures. He called them this way because they generally resembled human beings. They had 2 legs, 2 arms, and a single round head with 2 eyes and something that looked like a nose in between them. He even claims that these humanoids were female, as they had breasts. But this is where the similarities end. Although they did not seem to communicate with words, Alec understood that he was supposed to follow the aliens, and he did so. One of the entities moved toward what looked like a clear glass cabinet, indicating she wanted me to step in it. As I did so, it adjusted to my chin level. At the same time, something else came down from above, but I couldn't see it clearly. Then, on looking down, I found that I too had gained a plastic bodysuit or skin and taken on a blue-gray appearance. From this, I deduced that my female companions may well have a skin color similar to mine beneath their suits. Interestingly, I had no body hair. It was not so quite clear to me what would happen should I desire to go to the toilet. Perhaps there would be no need from here on in. This later proved to be a good guess. There was no way I could know if the plastic skin covered my head as it did theirs, and there was no mirror handy. The entire suit was almost impossible to feel. For all intents and purposes, it wasn't there, but it gave me complete freedom of movement. Afterward, one of the aliens approached him and, according to his memories, put a thought inside his head. This thought was that if he followed the entity, he would be placed in a much more comfortable place where he could communicate with other beings. Up to this point, he was unsure of what was happening. He did not think these were aliens, but angels, so he thought he might have died. Upon closer inspection of one of the angels, he could see that her eyes were beautiful and of a color between violet and blue. Her neck was long, and her shoulders were not straight but sloped down, finishing in 2 long arms with 5 fingers in each hand. He felt drawn to this entity, and he followed her to something that looked to him as a bowling alley. The entity left him there. As he explored the room, which was more like a long corridor, he noticed a door at the farther end. He went to the door and tried to open it, but found out he could just pass through it as if he were a ghost. The next room was much more familiar because it had furniture, chairs, desks, and tables. Everything, including the room itself, was circular and had no sharp edges. Next to one table, there was a woman, a human woman. He felt her presence and her words within his head. She said, "Welcome." He tried to answer, but no words came out. She continued. "My name's Millie," she said, and seeing Alec struggle, she told him not to try too hard to talk, but to just think what he wanted to say. At this point, it would be better to explain how these aliens communicate. As Alec learned during his stay, human communication is very primitive. It uses too many resources: muscles, entire organs, saliva, vibrations. The most common form of communication among otherworldly beings is telepathy. Telepathy does not use words. It does not need a language. And even so, it is 10 times more precise than any language on Earth. It does not require the other person to understand what you're trying to communicate. One does not need to encrypt a thought into words, only for those words to be decrypted by other people. As we all know, this method is prone to misunderstandings, many of which have terrible consequences, not to speak of the difficulties that arise from people speaking different languages. With telepathy, all those problems disappear. It is truly dynamic in means of interaction, instantaneous, precise, and universal. Even more, the alien language has an extra dimension to it. Each thought and concept is communicated telepathically and is accompanied by colors and notes that to Alec sounded musical, but were in fact a device that prevents their communications from being misread. Alec even mentions that, to him, those sounds were somewhat similar to the ones you can hear in Earth's Oriental music and languages. Alec also describes their numerical system, as it was very different from the modern metric standard. But it was built on a system of 12 instead of groups of 10. As the aliens explained, these values coincided with numbers that were already present in what humans call nature. This is not to say aliens communicate only telepathically. They also had a complex writing system, which again was based on letters as well as colors. These colors were not only the 7 basic colors of the rainbow. Each one of them was split into dark, medium, or light, each one with their own significance. Of course, it would have required considerable time, effort, and training for Alec to learn the language in 10 days. What he did instead was to copy the alphabetic system as he remembered it. He also copied the numbers from 1 to 12. These were enough to make all the rest of the numbers. The number 12 had a religious importance as well. It was a very revered symbol among aliens. After seeing it almost everywhere, Alec understood that it stood for a kind of national emblem at the aliens' homeland. It represented their civilization. And just as 7 represents completeness and therefore God to Jewish people, 12 was the most important number in their numerical system. The value 0 was always represented by the color white, and when white appeared in their writing, it was used to separate sequences of colors. Alec would always ask what the symbols meant out of curiosity, but in reality, 99% of communication was done through telepathy, directly into each other's mind, and without the need to learn the other one's language first. This is an extraordinary invention, one that would revolutionize life on Earth, and as we will see in a few minutes, this is not far from happening. Via telepathy, he learned from Millie that he was not dead or on another planet, but on a transporter they called Lightship. She explained that she once lived on Earth, but she didn't want to return. Millie was just a crew member. The ship was run by entities she called guardians or elders. But before she could explain anything else, they were approached by 3 beings. One resembled a woman, the other was smaller, more similar to the first 2 aliens he encountered, and the third one was the smallest of all and walked in front of them imposingly. Despite his size, this alien had an overpowering aura about him, and Alec knew instantly that he held a position of power in the ship. He introduced himself as one of the elders and assured him that he would be able to decide whether he wanted to go back to his planet or not, and assigned him a human-looking companion, the woman who had come with them named Xena. Xena became his escort on board of the lightship. She followed him everywhere for the following days and answered all his questions. Alec was curious as to why they had chosen him and planet Earth. Xena explained that they had been looking for a new home, and Earth was a good candidate for colonization, except that the aliens could not yet tolerate Earth's gravity. Enigmatically, she told Alec that this situation was about to change. Alec wanted to know more, but he was tired. Xena offered him liquid nourishment and a place to rest. Alec described his first important talk with Xena in detail. They were alone, in a white room without external distractions, and where a sensation of calmness permeated everything. She started to talk. I will, however, tell you more of your own race's personal history, for it is important that you should know your own past, and that evolution, as you understand, it is a myth. The changes are never slow, but they are always planned. Later, I shall show you that nothing in this universe, past, present, or future in your timescale, is left to chance. This came as a surprise to Alec, but as Xena kept talking, it all started to make sense in Alec's mind. There are different races of extraterrestrial beings in the universe. Many of them visited Earth in the past. In fact, some of them collaborated to do genetic experiments with Earth animals. One of its most important results was the development of Homo sapiens. Human beings were not the result of millions of years of evolution, but of the design of intelligent alien beings. These people were the Elders, space travelers who roamed the galaxy looking for a promising place to establish their civilization. Some Elders moved on to other planets, while some others stayed on Earth, looking after their creations and monitoring the development of the human race. According to Xena, the Elders helped humans thrive throughout history, and even planted seeds like the pyramids of Giza as their legacy to the human race. Humans were their most precious creation, and so they carefully prepared them for millennia so that one day, not far from today, they could finally reveal to us most of the secrets of the universe. But before that happened, said Xena, a dark force came down to Earth and claimed it as its own. The dark force took hold of the human race and became part of it by changing its DNA structure. This change crippled humanity, which was at first capable of achieving things that today would be unthinkable. Our development was set back thousands of years, Xena told him. That force is known to most as the force of darkness, for it is indeed the enemy of enlightenment. It is in the air you breathe and everywhere about you. It has aligned itself to the planet and you. It beats to the pulse of your very planet, for you and the Earth are one and the same. Alec's mind was blown. He wanted to ask questions, but he did not know where to start. He asked about this dark force and how it survived. Xena told him it fed on fear. Just like the Elders, the dark force traveled around multiple planets and systems, looking for easy prey. When it discovered that humans had that particular emotion, fear, which is not at all common in the galaxy, the dark force immediately targeted the human race. Some people tried to harness fear and aligned with the dark force in order to control other humans. These people have engineered fear into your lives. Most of it is an artificial fear of society itself. In other words, humans fear their very own laws. There is actually no need in our current society to feel fear. Humans are not threatened by predators. They have mastered knowledge about most of the basic scientific and physics principles, and they are able to accurately predict most of the natural occurrences, such as stellar cycles, meteorological phenomena, and everything that has to do with the life cycle of plants and animals. So all their fears are based on nothing but the will of those in power. This, according to Xena, started millennia ago. High priests threatened men and women with what would happen if they disobeyed, because that would not please the gods. It was kind of an intimidation. Now, for a large part of humanity, it is not gods they fear, but laws. The laws of men, mostly made thanks to the manipulation of the dark force, are against the laws of nature in many cases. This is exactly why Alec was abducted. Xena suggested that the force would soon feel the weight of an invasion from above, and there would be battles fought at sea and underwater, as well as in the skies high above. The Earth would experience storms of gathering intensity, and they would appear randomly all over Earth. The elders believed that humans were strong enough to fight and win these battles against the dark force. The problem is, they don't even know that the dark force even exists. For this reason, they are ready to help humans in their fight. "How do we win?" asked Alec. "With knowledge and understanding," said Xena. Alec finally understood why he was there, to learn and then translate those truths to his fellow human beings. Alec asked why they were so interested in helping humans, instead of just letting them annihilate themselves in the long run. Xena smiled, because she had been waiting for that question. It showed her that Alec was the right person to be trusted with this truth. She told Alec that they also needed things from planet Earth, so in truth, it was kind of a trade. Xena used the word co-evolution. This meant that both humans and the elder race would be able to grow and change for the better. They intended to be friends with the humans once they learned how to break free from the dark force. Of course, he was not the only one to be abducted. Each one of the carefully selected individuals would have a similar conversation in a similar spacecraft, because it wasn't sure that any of them would succeed in convincing their fellow humans of what sounded like the ravings of a lunatic. During his stay in the light ship, Alec had time to explore it. This is how he describes it. The areas were constructed in such a way that the curved walls and unusual diffused lighting made size rather difficult to estimate using sight alone. Back then, I had no idea just what material was used to construct these rather strange-looking walls, but I noticed there was a honeycomb-type pattern deep within them. I was also puzzled by the fluorescent blue-white light that was emitted by these same walls and the domed ceiling, for it seemed to have no direct source. Alec was outfitted with a skin or suit that made him look exactly like the aliens on the ship, only taller. It appeared custom-made, as it fitted his body perfectly, so much that he often forgot that he was wearing it. It did not seem to have any zipper, and the texture was similar to Teflon, very smooth except for the fingertips, which were slightly ribbed. Xena had explained to him that the suits provided nourishment through the exchange of energy, and that while wearing them he would never need to eat solid food or expel any waste substances from his body, so there was no reason to take it out at any time. From Xena, he learned how the whole ship was powered. Alec already knew that electromagnetic energy naturally surrounds and permeates most planets, including Earth. This type of energy can be used as an endless, inexhaustible power source, which is very cheap to access because it is everywhere. In the case of the light ship's aliens, they had known how to harness electromagnetic energy for many thousands of years. This energy can be tapped in the simplest of ways, with technology that's been available on planet Earth for a long time. Indeed, Alec learned that UFOs used this energy source to power their craft when they visited Earth. The main advantage of electromagnetic energy is that it doesn't require generators. Nuclear, hydro, coal, and oil-powered generators would be unnecessary, as well as wires and cables, as there would be no need to transmit this energy. It would suffice with individual receivers, like radios. This was not science fiction. Humans have known about this technology since the early 20th century, when Nikola Tesla researched this exciting technology that would end all power shortages forever. He was sabotaged by the people in power, whose interests were connected to form an energy they could profit from. He then inquired about the shape of the ship. Xena struggled to find a way of explaining, as she usually did, because their civilizations were so different. She always tried to start by describing something he could relate to. Their early explorers, Xena explained, arrived in the north of what Alec knew as Africa. There, they met the natives and helped them develop their society. As the elders had a lifespan of 8 times that of terrestrial people, they were regarded as immortal gods. They didn't mind this mistake as long as they worked together to improve human civilization. Some of them even enjoyed it. When they were ready to leave Earth, they left a blueprint of an older model of ship so that in due time they could ascend on it. The blueprints have always been there, in the middle of the Egyptian desert for all to see. The pharaohs claimed the pyramids for themselves and even had more of them built, but never actually understood the incredible technology that is encoded in the ones the elders built. Alec was puzzled. He could hardly believe that he was traveling through space inside a pyramid just like the ones in Egypt. Xena patiently explained that at the moment it was not pyramid-shaped, but once it landed, it would become one. These transporters can change shape when they need to gather energy from a planet. According to Xena, the pyramid is by far the most efficient shape to do that with, and so is the cone. "When will we land?" asked Alec. "Soon," replied Xena, "when we arrive at Haven." At that moment, Alec learned the name of their home planet and felt excited to reach it and learn more about their way of life. One of the first things that Xena revealed to Alec was the existence of an other side to himself and to everything that existed. At first, he did not understand, but it was the main topic of a later conversation with her where she explained that everything that existed had 2 dimensions, one positive and one negative. Humans, in their present form, and because they had their DNA changed by the dark force, could only access the positive dimension of existence. They were unable to see anything that existed in the second dimension. This dimension was parallel to the first, but in it, there were no boundaries between bodies, things, or substances. Being able to reach the negative dimension meant being able to access the secrets of the human body, travel between past and future, and transcend the dimensions of pain, time, and existence. Everything exists at the same time everywhere. So if someone can slip between dimensions, he can access anything he wants immediately. This was difficult for Alec to understand, so Xena gave him an example. Suppose you are looking for something, your car keys, anything. You go to the kitchen table, where they always are, but you don't see the keys, so you keep looking and go into another room. They're not there. Then you come back to the kitchen, and the keys are right on top of the kitchen table. You couldn't have missed them the first time. You're completely sure that they weren't there. But that can't be, so you blame yourself and continue living your life without giving another thought to the whole matter. In reality, this was what Xena called dimension slipping, a mini leap from one dimension to the other, one where you can access anything you need when you need it. Xena described herself and the crew of the ship as dimensional time travelers because they came from Alec's future. They were in the process of improving their own race by experimenting and mixing human and alien DNA. She told him that although their experiments were successful, they still needed to find a better way of processing air in an oxygen-rich atmosphere like Earth had. As humans were physically adapted to life on Earth, they were starting to look more like humans. In the future, they would not be distinguishable at first glance from regular humans. That is when they could finally disembark on Earth, their new home. They also hadn't perfected the human form of reproduction. They abducted human women and artificially inseminated them with modified alien embryos. The hybrids born from these surrogate mothers were named and numbered, and Xena was the 5th of her brood. However, the main problem that prevented aliens from intermingling with humans for the time being was their vibrating frequencies. Aliens vibrated on a higher plane than humans. In order to communicate, or even to be perceived by other things, they need to vibrate at the same frequency. Alec's frequency was changed when he was abducted. Otherwise, he would find himself inside a completely empty space. This is what happens with ghosts on Earth. They are perceived during temporary dimensional mini-leaps, but not as having a complete body. Once their frequency is modified, humans will be able to perceive every form of being that exists in the same plane of existence, including the aliens of the race that abducted Alec. After explaining all this, Xena took Alec to a room with a special chair that was fitted with a wraparound headrest. Some other aliens were present, operating complicated machinery. Xena referred to these aliens as technicians. Alec knew he was supposed to sit in the chair and tighten the headrest around his head. This was the first and only time when he felt fear, and it was only briefly. He found out later that what they performed on him were compatibility tests. These tests were required for him to enter the so-called breeding program on planet Haven. In short, Alec was tested for resistance to different viruses, and also to see if any viruses were present on his organism. They did not share the results with him, but seeing that they allowed him to descend on Haven, he must have passed them. Their technicians commenced the procedure and positioned the headrest. It was tight-fitting around the head and came well forward just above my ears. Then they proceeded to show me a range of flashing pictures. I have no memory of what they were about, or whether they were projected onto a screen or placed directly in my head. How long this went on, I don't know. I'm not sure if they took a blood sample, but they did put one of my fingers into a tube-like affair for a time while the pictures were being shown. There was a grim reason why these aliens were so preoccupied with viruses and resistance to them. Humans have never been the only intelligent species on Earth. Long before they appeared in their modern form, a race of visiting aliens, known to a few as Greys, had established themselves on the planet. For most of human history, they preferred to live in the dark. But since the second half of the 20th century, they became involved with a faction of Earth's military-industrial cartel, in part because they shared an agenda. This agenda involved introducing a new breed of humans onto the planet. And just as Neanderthals went extinct when Homo sapiens appeared, the human race will probably disappear when this new type of human beings are let loose. The plan is simple. The Greys, together with human military scientists, are secretly building a new race that has a resistance to a certain lethal virus. Then, they will leave that lethal virus free amongst the general population. Haven elders have already been doing preliminary tests on planet Earth to see how these viruses work. In the case of Alec, they also didn't want him to enter their planet carrying some hidden virus. After the test, Alec was brought to the same transparent machine where he first got his blue-gray suit. But this time, when he got out of the machine, his suit was golden. Apart from the color, it looked exactly like the one before, smooth and glossy like Teflon and perfectly tailored to his body. He didn't know what to expect from Planet Haven, so before landing, he asked Xena and other crew members all he could. According to Xena, Haven was not very different from Earth, only it was much smaller. Apart from that, the vegetation was very similar, and it was fully populated, with just a few very small desert areas. The problem was that their sun was now reaching the end of its useful life. Its pulsations would become violent and unpredictable in the near future, eventually putting an end to their planet's ability to support biological life forms. A bigger problem they had was that if they were to establish themselves on any other planet larger than Haven, they would have to get used to the gravity. Haven was a tiny globe, even by Earth standards. Its gravity was less than half of Earth's gravity, and its atmospheric pressure was also much lower. Xena's ancestors were not originally from Haven. They had moved there when some catastrophe befell their other planet. According to Xena, this was so many years ago that records of such a migration were long lost to them. Since they learned of the short lifespan of their sun, they began to look for other places to migrate. In the solar system, planets like Mars or even the Earth's present moon appealed to them because of their size, and Earth had evident advantages in its developed flora and fauna and a much more stable atmosphere. The bravest of Xena's ancestors made efforts to tolerate Earth's atmosphere and gravity so that they could help establish intelligent life on our planet, so that at some point in the future they could coexist on that very planet. When the spaceship approached Haven, Alec could see that it was the junior partner in a twin planetary system. Haven looked to be a small planet in orbit around a much larger planet. He was excited to finally see the planet close up. Haven looked to be a small planet in orbit around a much larger planet, perhaps similar to our Earth and its moon, but with the roles reversed. Haven seemed to have the water and some clouds, while the larger globe looked very much like our own moon, dry and barren. The only real difference seemed to be that on Haven there was a predominance of blue-black seas and reddish-brown land, rather than the blues and green-browns mixed with abundant cloud cover as on Earth. When they descended through Haven's atmosphere, Xena pointed to a small black spot that was getting larger and told Alec that it was her hometown, Nepalissa. Regarding the political organization of Haven, it sounded to Alec like a much simpler and more efficient method than the ones they had on Earth. There were no individual countries like on Earth, so the government ruled over the entire planet. There were 3 major districts, and each elected 3 citizens to represent them on a high council. These 9 high councilors were empowered to make all major decisions concerning the planet's well-being. One new councilor is elected every 2 years, which were considerably shorter than Earth's years. In turn, the oldest member of the council stepped down and became a general overseer. This way, there is a new council member every 2nd year, bringing a constant flow of new ideas. No member can sit again once he has stepped down, so there is stability, and fresh ideas keep coming through. Xena explained that this system worked very well, so well that every city copied the exact same system. On the surface of the planet, Alec understood why Xena highlighted the good functioning of the council. The first, most striking thing about the city was its neatness and order. The second, its immensity. Even from well up, I could not make out the boundaries. There may well be bigger cities on Earth, but where I come from, this place would be rated big, very big. It stretched out in both directions, following the coastline out of my line of sight. There seemed to be only a thin strip of land that was not coastland or desert, and the city was sandwiched within it. One thing that struck Alec as odd was the lack of tall buildings, except for 1 or 2 towers, and the dominance of a small, circular shape among a few larger, pyramid-shaped constructions. The lightship landed next to an area of level ground, similar to a courtyard, leading to 2 pyramid-shaped buildings. They appeared to be made from a material that looked just like tinted glass or semi-transparent plastic. They were capped with a spiral tower that looked like an antenna. Each building in turn was topped with what Alec describes as large light bulbs. The ship's elders allowed Xena to have Alec stay with her family as a guest. In fact, they were the only 2 people who had descended to the planet's surface. Once off the spacecraft, Alec confirmed that it was pyramid-shaped. The sky was almost black, except for a streak of blue and orange close to the horizon, above the short buildings. Despite this, everything was illuminated as if it were broad daylight. A short distance from the lightship, Alec and Xena found themselves at the transporter base. As far as Alec could see, there were no buses or trains, only receptacles that looked like cubicles made of semi-transparent plastic. They stepped inside one, and Xena fed it some coordinates before being sent off in one direction. Upon disembarking next to Xena's house, Alec asked her about the lack of sound outside. It felt strange to him not to hear any birds, animals, or insects. Zena replied, "We have no other life forms on the planet. That is the way it has always been, except for some very simple types which live in the sea." Apparently, nothing else could survive in that specific and artificial dimension, so these aliens were the only living beings on the whole planet. Zena's house was big, round, and every wall was either curved outward or had a honeycombed pattern to it. Although it did not appear to have any windows or stages, Alec calculated that it was probably 3 stories high. He was so mesmerized by everything that was going on that he did not pay attention to how they entered the house. He simply found himself inside, in a huge white and golden room. Once inside, Zena told him that she was going to meditate. Alec decided to try it too, but no matter how hard he tried to meditate, his body did not change position. Zena, on the other hand, was floating 6 inches above the ground. As the vibrating frequencies in Planet Haven made sleeping unnecessary, and knowing that Alec could only stay for a couple of days, Zena offered to give him tours around the city. Alec jumped at the opportunity. Zena then introduced him to the people she called her parents. They were elders who had custody over Zena but did not look anything like her. One of them, Jarze, offered to take them for a ride around the city in a car-like transport named the Dan Dares Special. The Dan Dares Special had seating for 4. It was a bit of a squeeze to get into, but with some adjustments, I managed to fit into it. The car was being driven on a gray-brown surface, similar to the cork-like material of the streets. This road was approximately 10 meters, 33 feet wide, and did not appear to be curved, but the outline side was so precise it looked as if it had been cut with a sharp knife. During the car trip, Alec could not decide what excited him the most, the incredible city or this car that seemed to run on magic. When he asked, Jarze told him that it worked with part mind power, part magnetic repulsion. As far as he could tell, there were no rails or anything that steered the car for them. In fact, there was no need for a car, as one could technically reach most places within the city just by stepping into the semi-transparent transporters. Perhaps the word car was not the most accurate, but it was a private means of transportation within a cabin where 4 people could sit at one time. The areas that passed by all looked to Alec as residential areas. There were no shops as such, although many buildings had large windows where you could look at what happened inside. Alec learned that hard cash, coins, or notes did not exist. In 1989, Alec described the way the cities were organized as communist because nothing was sold or bought over the counter. Resources were assigned to people based on their everyday specific needs. Everyone needed to work in order for the society to continue existing, but there was a top to the number of hours one could work. Many aliens applied for community projects, which could encompass almost anything, including space travel. Anyway, people did not have a great desire to own things, which to a Western human mind was difficult to understand. Alec noticed again how these buildings appeared vast but not tall. There were also some glass or crystal pyramids, which were supposed to contain all the knowledge of the people. After the car trip, Alec asked if he could go to one of those pyramid-shaped buildings, the one that was supposed to be a public library or something similar, where records were kept about the history and society of Haven. Alec took it upon him to learn as much as he could from this library. When he visited it, he sat at a long desk and records were brought to him. He was surprised to see that the records did not just speak of Haven, but also of Earth. Both planets seemed to have had a similar history, and they were even related in some way. According to Haven's records, its history started 12,000 years before the present time. It was at that time that Haven started to orbit around its twin planet, as Alec could witness. It took some time for Alec to understand why there were so many references to Earth and to that particular date. This is how he summarizes his findings. I was astounded to learn from the Haven archives that our Earth did not always have its present moon, and that, indeed, this present moon is a recent acquisition, possibly as recent as 12,000 years ago. However, Earth already had a companion satellite before the arrival of this new moon. Apparently, this moon was not a moon as you might conceive of one. It was actually a small planet, a mini-Earth. It was inhabited by life forms similar to those on Earth today, but some were more advanced. Indeed, scientists on Earth already know that 12,000 years ago something strange happened to our moon. Some think that the original moon crashed into the Earth, thus forming the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans, and at the same time causing the Great Flood, which all ancient civilizations describe in their myths. The only problem with this theory is that it doesn't explain how the human race managed to survive this cataclysm. Not only does geological evidence point to Earth having had a larger or closer moon at that time, but it also suggests that one moon was swapped for another. Some of the evidence even suggests there was a time when the Earth had no moon at all. What Alec discovered in the Haven archives was that Earth's original moon was actually Haven. The explanation of how and why the planet of Haven ended up so far away from Earth when they had been orbiting each other for so many millions of years is still unclear. Alec would have needed many more days of study and research to find out exactly what happened. Here is what he had to say about it. It is not only the planets of Haven and Earth that appeared to be tied. The peoples of ancient Earth, who still had Haven blood coursing through their veins, could well have been involved in a disappearing act when Haven leaped into this other dimension. In other words, it is as if they were somewhere too, and the Earth tried to follow. The story of the Haven inhabitants, on the other hand, was easier to understand. Originally, they lived in the solar system, very close to Earth. The original planet went by the name of Kyber, and at the time it was the fourth planet from the Sun. Kyber orbited the Sun outside the orbit of the planet Mars. Venus did not exist yet. It was predominantly a watery planet, smaller than but not unlike Earth in most respects. Most of the water was frozen the entire year, as Kyber was much further from our Sun than the Earth. In its elliptical orbit, in some stages, it would get almost as close to the Sun as Mars. Most life forms that developed or were seeded upon planet Kyber lived underground, making the best out of geothermal heat that emanated from the planet's core. As these life forms evolved, two distinct intelligent races eventually emerged. One race established itself on the surface of the planet, despite it being so cold. They did not mind the low temperature. They preferred to live a simple life and shun technology altogether, opting to live in complete harmony with nature. They developed a symbiotic relationship with other plants and animals on the surface of Kyber. They were so attuned to nature that they developed psychic abilities. Their bodies were furry and small. This way, they protected themselves from the cold. The other race was almost the complete opposite. These beings, too, were highly intelligent, but they were also technologically advanced, which was a necessity since they lived mostly underground. They became a race smaller in stature and more delicate than surface dwellers. They did have some physical resemblance in that they both had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. It was the more inquisitive subterranean group that discovered space travel, but it was at this time when everything started to become undone for them. Their first step in space exploration was to one of Kyber's moons, and in due course, they visited all 3 moons. At about that time, they were conducting experiments on the planet itself regarding interdimensional travel. But something went terribly wrong with the experiments, and the planet Kyber was completely destroyed. Just before that, the subterranean group launched a ship to one of their moons, where they included a group of hairy surface dwellers, as well as other life forms that lived in and under Kyber's surface. Alec equates this scenario to Noah's Ark. The group of migrants from Kyber successfully converted the moon into a spacecraft. They used this vehicle to travel to the closest planet, Mars, which at that time had only 1 moon. The travelers were hoping to colonize Mars and establish themselves there, as it had an atmosphere and liquid water on its surface. But unfortunately, the effects of destruction of Kyber also affected the atmosphere of Mars, making it uninhabitable. These processes took thousands of years, but the colonizers from Kyber needed to plan their future very carefully if they wanted to survive. The next obvious choice was Earth and its moon. The hairy beings were given the chance to settle on Earth first, as they were more suited to the prevailing conditions on the planet. The smaller, subterranean Kyberians used Earth's moon as their home base. Over time, they improved their space technology enough to be able to go wherever they chose. A small group of them remained on Mars, but were forced to live underground. This was not really a hardship for them, as it was the way of their ancestors. There were no records of this group, so it is probable that they are still living under the surface of Mars. Alec learned that some of the subterranean Kyberians did settle on Earth, whereas most of them remained orbiting it from their moon. Eventually, they found a good place to establish themselves outside of the solar system, so they set the controls to the point where Haven is now. However, they learned from their past mistakes, so in order not to disturb the Earth's atmosphere, they replaced the moon with another rock of similar size. After learning so much about alien technology and history, one question came recurringly to Alec's mind. Why him? He was still unsure of why they had singled him out on a planet where almost 6 billion people lived. He did not find answers to that question, only the promise that he would understand in due course. This is when he was informed that he would be returning to Earth soon. They did not explain why, but he understood that it had to do with his body and mind not being able to withstand so many days outside his own planet. He became suspicious about the tests that were performed on him. Maybe they had taken his seeds for use in their breeding program. He thought about his life back on Earth. It was not a very exciting one. He knew his golden suit was partly made of actual gold, so he wondered if he could take it back to Earth. He would be rich. Unfortunately, this just wasn't possible. He would have this suit replaced by the traveling blue-gray version, and then, back on Earth, he would be dressed just as he was before the abduction. This is what Alec said about the last days before leaving Haven. The act of leaving was more emotional for me than I could possibly have imagined just a few days before. Some of the happenings immediately prior to this final act on alien soil had rather taken me by surprise. Perhaps one day, when experiences such as mine are no longer considered controversial, and ridicule does not flow so readily from non-believers' lips, I may summon the courage to tell you the complete story of my adventure. Apart from the memories and knowledge he learned in Haven, Alec brought back with him a mysterious message, which Xena told him just before he left. Forget the abomination you have seen here. When you get home, with all caution and common sense, let the sun see your eyes. In spite of what others may say, do not hide yourself from a friend. As he would soon learn, this had to do with the fact that the gray aliens, together with the CIA and NASA, are actively trying to cover up anything and everything that has to do with the elders from Haven. But he did not know this at the time when he was brought by Jarze to a huge lightship. Alec was unsure whether it was the same lightship as before, but from the outside it looked identical. On board the ship, there were several unknown crew members, but he did find a familiar face. Millie was still part of the crew, and during the several hours of that voyage, he had long, stimulating talks with her. She had agreed to this mission because it might have been her last chance to see Earth for many years, so she wanted to make the most of it. So did Alec, who was now much more used to how these aliens did things. For this reason, he was informed that preparations were underway for his transmutation back to a lower density. This was what they silently did to him when he first stepped onto the ship, although they did not tell him at the time. He simply wouldn't have understood. Now he needed to undergo a similar course of events as had happened on his way, 9 days before, but of course in reverse order. It was a process that would change the rhythm of his metabolism in order to get used quickly to the vibrating frequencies of Earth. They made him consume quite an amount of a very salty and strange liquid. The total time for this transmutation process was approximately 24 hours. The sequence of events was explained to him beforehand, as it would not be possible to communicate with Alec once the suit had been removed. Alec recalls his last moments on the lightship. From this point on, things are a little sketchy. I did arrive in Auckland eventually, as you already know from the sequence of events at the beginning of my narration. However, little did I know that my adventure was not over yet. In fact, it was just beginning to warm up. What I had been through was the prelude to, and the reason for, an equally bizarre series of events which were to occur right here on home ground. After remembering everything, and especially since the original scare with the alleged DSIR scientists, Alec decided to adopt a low profile and keep to himself as much as he could. At the same time, he started writing his book, planning to release it when the time was right. He understood that the agents probably worked for or together with the dark forces that Xena had described to him. They were very powerful and had reasons for wanting Alec to keep quiet. But as time went on, he began to relax. He had to make a living, so he went back to his old profession, buying and selling used cars. This line of work involved talking to different people, making connections, and being friendly with potential clients, most of whom he had never met in his life. The first red flag came when his landlord reported that some people who identified themselves as police officers had inquired about a car Alec once owned. Of course, he had no idea about what had happened to that car, but Alec did not know what to make of it. He did notice the presence of a car with 2 occupants parked daily in front of his house. Eventually, he was approached by them and informed that they were CIA operatives. They appealed to his patriotism and love for planet Earth. They claimed that the extraterrestrial beings with which he had contact were dangerous to Earth's defense, and they just wanted to make sure the planet was safe. But Alec did not fall for this trap and declined to make comments. He would soon regret it. After a while, the car disappeared, but he was far from being off the hook. When dealing with cars, it is important to know who you are selling and buying from, and if they are legitimate. Of course, Alec had always dealt with people he trusted, but after the stock market crash of 1987, he had to change strategies. Soon after his return to planet Earth, a gentleman introduced himself to Alec during a car auction in Auckland City. He claimed to have recognized Alec as the partner of a mutual friend and that they had met once. He said his name was Jeff Wright and that he had access to cheap Japanese second-hand imported cars, which were hard to come by in New Zealand and especially for a low price. Unwittingly, Alec started buying cars from this man. The problem was that they were stolen, so when the police came knocking at his door and asking to see the papers on the cars, he understood he had been set up. There was no way out of it. A long period of attorneys, judges, and paperwork started. And just when he was about to lose the case and go to prison, he was approached again by CIA agents. They had done a fairly good job setting up the scene. Their message was simple enough: cooperate, and they would fix things up for him with the police. He had no choice but to tell the CIA everything he had learned as seen in Haven. Fortunately for him, they left him alone afterward. Apparently, they just wanted information. Still, Alec took the chance to publish his book, and it did bring him several problems and persecution by some of the planet's most powerful organizations. Even then, he did not hesitate to share this incredible knowledge with whoever was ready to listen. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it, and leave a comment with your thoughts below. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again.